Barani, shopkeepers, hawkers, street sellers, you name it, called the India FDI Watch Campaign to resist the modification of FDI until there was a plan for what to do with the 20 million jobs that would be impacted, which was actually still a lot of jobs even for India. And to this day, incidentally, this was actually a fun organizing committee picture. I usually wouldn't put those in, but this is a bunch of traders in Chennai, which used to be called Madras. They are very big about banners and pictures in India. So, what happened to that campaign? Seems to have gone pretty well. Well, here's what happened. So, SEIU and UFCW, that were partners with the AFL-CIO in supporting this campaign, they actually funded the campaign, had this little problem. And there became two labor federations. So that meant it was difficult for them to combine on this project. And then within Change to Win, there was this little problem of Andy Stern, who at that time was the international president of SEIU, developed that part of the way he wanted to use the leverage we were creating this campaign was he put a bear hug that was widely pictured in the papers on Lee Scott, who was the CEO of Walmart. And this was all that UFCW could take. Like I said, labor unions are political institutions. I think I mentioned that. So overnight, I laid off 25 organizers in Florida after that picture. So that was what happened to Warren. And then the Walmart Workers Association, well, they were paying dues. They could actually support some organizers. What happened to them? Well, when I met with President Hansen, I said, I've got good news and bad news. Good news, the pilot works. And I've told you already, I'm not going to bore you. 1,000 people, 6 months, here are the numbers, here's the, here's the records, here's what joined. Bad news, it worked. Because what that means is you'd have to make a decision as international president and board whether or not you want to embrace this strategy and actually hunker down and try to build, this is Walmart, 100, 150,000 members within Walmart so that you had enough traction inside the company to actually leverage change, create the kind of organization you need to work. And he decided not to. I guess I forgot to say that. He decided not to do that, although it's interesting to me reading the papers, talking to organizers. In the last year, they've tried to resuscitate that organizing model to try again, but unless they've made a commitment, as I mentioned, to get to 100, 150, 200,000 members, it won't go well. And as for the India FDI campaign, well, you're looking at Joe Sausage Head. That was part of Acorn International, which means it's still alive and well, because we don't know how to say quit. And in fact, if those of you who are avid readers of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal know that last fall the Parliament was stalemated for almost 3 weeks in India because the Prime Minister Singh declared unilaterally that he was going to modify multi-brand retail, which is what these guys want, so that you could own more than 51%, and then our coalition came together, and there was a huge political mess that was stalemate in Parliament, so he had to retract that, and eventually they'll get it. This is business after all. But for right now, 6 years and counting, 2005, so 7 years and counting, still no modification, and what we hope, when there is modification, to my business friends in the audience, it'll be with the protections for those workers that will lose their job in those communities. So Acorn International, which deals with that, as we were talking about earlier, it turns out the world is really large. You can say, gee, we work in 12, 13 countries. Do you know how little that is in the world? I mean, that's like not 10% of all the countries that are out there, raising a flag every morning wherever the time zone hits them. And even you can green up this thing, like Canada turns out to be a wonderfully large place. Canada is like US. If you want to see what Acorn looks like in the United States now, you go to Canada. That's my short answer. But as you can see, we work mainly in mega slums. I wanted to go back and do more of what I originally was trying to do in welfare rights and build organization among the poorest possible families. And there are these huge slums which give good organizing density. Dharavi in Mumbai, La Matanza outside of Buenos Aires, San Juan de Argancho outside of Lima, Edessa outside of Mexico City. These slums all have more than 1 million people that live there. Corogochu, which is in Nairobi. Let me do this again. It's the second largest slum. You know, if you ever watch the movie Constant Gardener, it's a cultural experience that you've missed. Well, that was Cabrera. That's the largest slum. Ours is next door, Corogochu. And then if you ever watch Slumdog Millionaire, that's Darabi. That's where we work. In fact, you remember the giant culverts going into the mangrove swamps. Our recycling office, where we organize rag pickers and have agreements with some 50 schools in Mumbai to pick up their recycling, et cetera, actually has a recycling office and sorting center right there on top of that thing. So the interesting thing about working around the world is that you also find that some of the experiences we think are so unique here in working in the United States aren't quite as special as what we thought. So one of the things that was fascinating to me, and I actually wrote about it here, which is Maharashtra is the state, the 200+ million state where Mumbai is the central city. And this sort of labor, community, political coalition to build worker organization is old school there. It's old hat. They have the first most successful group of workers they organized was Mathadi workers, who are dock workers, essentially. These were fairly recent pictures, but this organization in Navi Mumbai, this is the APMC Center, which is where they take agricultural products going into Mumbai and break them down into trucks. They won labor standards in a union, which has about 50,000 members there, by combining, once again, worker strength with political leverage in Mumbai, in the Bombay Municipal Corporation, and in the state. And the same thing has been duplicated in several states in India among auto rickshaw drivers, domestic workers. I know New York is a big thing. We're very proud of them. Domestic worker protections and standards have existed in India now for almost 20 years. Now, are they enforced? Well, that's a whole other question, but I've already said these things aren't enforced in the United States either. I mean, what did I say, $83 billion lying on the table? Don't talk to me about enforcement. So yeah, India, but it's an organizing model, and that's how it works over there. If you want more details, it's all in, turns out community organizing is something that's happening around the world, I've found, and it's quite an exciting thing. It's covering global grassroots. So if the past was places like India, the future is actually maybe in Canada, if you can believe that. And in Canada, the BCGEU, which is one of the more interesting unions, I've worked with them very closely. They have 80,000 members, largely in British Columbia, headquartered out of Vancouver. It's a public and private sector workers union. They brought a suit trying to organize home care workers called Health Services, which was decided 3 or 4 years ago by the Canadian Supreme Court. And the Canadian Supreme Court held that in Canada, workers have the ability to demand representation and bargaining from an employer at any point they decide to, because it's a fundamental part of what they call their Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Charter of Rights and Freedoms, think Bill of Rights. Bill of Rights, think Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It turns out embedded in that, you probably can't tell by the small print here, is this right to organize and right to be represented on the job. So you can imagine the kind of arguments I've made about majority unionism. You could very quickly make demands at the point you had traction. So starting this summer in Toronto, we're doing a project that I'm leading up there to try to see if we can put together the same kind of organization among informal workers, particularly domestics, and we're looking at office workers and some others. You never know what'll move. And our big private sector partner, and unfortunately I just saw this guy leave who had been with steelworkers, is actually the steelworkers, who are one of the largest, if not the largest, private sector workers union in Canada. The caution there is that we actually have had the steelworkers in Canada agree to this project several times over the last 3 or 4 years. But every year as they come to their summer board meeting and get ready to fund the project,